Okay, so basically this is a very basic introduction to metal clay. I'm not a certified teacher, and in order to be a certified teacher, you have to take a lot of classes and do things, but taking those classes, you'll actually get a lot more information, and they have a lot more knowledge than I do. But this is a good overview, and it's very brief, or about an hour. So the first thing I want to say is, in the first question I always get when I talk about doing metal clay is that, is it really metal, or is it a polymer clay that looks like metal, or is it a plastic type clay? And it is actually a metal, and you can hear when you throw your pieces on to a hard surface, you should hear the little tings, and they should, you know, make a metallic sound because they are actual metal. They're the metal that's embedded in the clay. What metal clay actually is a powdered metal that has been put with a organic binder that burns off in the firing process, and then leaves you with the metal that has sintered or melded itself together. And you can do everything with metal clay once it's finished that you can do with actual metal. You can solder it, you can saw it, you can cut it, you can melt it down and refine it, you can mill it. Pretty much anything you can do with an actual sheet of metal or metal that you have worked in a crucible, you can do with metal clay. There's a lot of different brands of metal clay. You can do some research on each of them. Each of them have their pros and cons. I've worked with PMC, and did you have a question? Okay, so I've worked with PMC, PMC Plus. I've worked with Aussie Metal Clay Bronze, and I've worked with their, I have some of their silver, haven't actually worked with it yet. I do prefer, I've worked with Fast Fire Bronze, and I've worked with Copper and Bronze Clay, which is a brand name. And I actually prefer the Aussie clay because it's more of a polymer texture to me. And other people prefer the other clays because they're more of a pottery texture. But working with metal clay is very similar to working with polymer clays or working with pottery clays, in that you can mold it, you can texture it, you can add pieces to it and take pieces away from it. I'm not really good at solder, so I like the ability to join my pieces before I sinter them and not have to do the soldering. So this is an example of a piece that I added the clay to the back so I didn't have to solder it, and it gave me a bail to use as a pendant. So this is a very flexible medium and allows you a lot of creative ability to basically make whatever you want out of metal, depending on how much time and resources you want to invest. There are some really, really good teachers out there, and I advise, if you're interested in this medium, go ahead and join some of the Facebook groups for metal clay. People are super helpful and willing to help you learn, and if you make mistakes, they can tell you how to fix it.
Is it very expensive?
On my handout, I have a bunch of the terms that we'll be using, and if I say something that you're not familiar with, just go ahead, and at the end of the class we'll go over everything that you don't, if you have any questions on that. So to get started, I highly recommend working with the base clays, with the metal, with bronzes, or I'd stick with bronzes to start because they fire at a lower temperature than copper or brass, but they give you a good feel of what the medium is like without the huge investment of silver. Silver can be pretty darn expensive to work with. For workability, silver actually is easier to fire than the base metals, but having worked with the base metals will give you a good foundation without a lot of investment. One of the things that you want to make sure you have, as far as tools go, I would make sure you have a roller, and that can be anything from just a plain acrylic roller I use this one because it has the little bands on it that are pre-measured for the card size, and it makes it easier for me to have flexibility. The basic unit measure for metal clay is a card, and that's pretty much because when it first started becoming developed as a medium, you would use standard playing cards and they would stack them up, and that would give you your thickness. So when you see something refer to 3 cards, it's actually talking about 3 playing cards thick. So you can get a cheap deck of cards. You want to make sure they're standard playing cards and use those for your cards. And being able to use that unit of measure is important because all of your firing instructions are given in cards. So they'll say fire at 750 for 3 card thickness, fire at 750 degrees for 30 minutes to burn off the binder, or however long you want to go for sintering. Sorry, this is my second time actually teaching the class, so I'm trying to follow along and not forget a whole lot of stuff. So for the basic tools, you have your rollers, and then the rest of the tools are pretty much open season. The minimum you want to have are a couple good paintbrushes. Well, not good, but stiff. You want at least a stiff paintbrush, and then a fluffy paintbrush to get the metal clay crumbs off your piece as it dries. I saw a chat, but I can't read it right now. I use the long tweezers to fish my pieces out of the carbon medium, so I like those. These are just some tools I got on Amazon. They're pottery or polymer clay tools, and they're fun, and they work really good, and they're not very expensive. Some of the more expensive, but not really very expensive tools I have are these rubber tipped tools that I got in the polymer clay section at Michael's, and they're very good for detailing and putting in some of the details. You'll want an X-Acto knife so you can cut your clay, your forms out. You'll want a good set of needle files for cleaning up your clay after it's formed. I have a plastic playing straw. I find that it's really, or drinking straw, I find it's really good to cut circles out in a consistent round size, and it lifts it out so I have a nice hole for my jewelry. I also have little stainless steel cookie cutters. You can get those in the polymer clay. You can use your regular cookie cutters as long as you make sure that you put a little bit of olive oil on them so that your clay doesn't stick. Something else that I use for texture and designs, I have all these tools that I bought for my glass work to make imprints and designs in the glass work that I do. And you can use those in your metal work as well. I have these leather working tools, and those also work really good to make imprints into metal clay, especially when you stink at leather work like I do. So those all go good. You can find textures anywhere. There was a lady I saw in one of the chats that found a dead seahorse, and she pressed it into polymer clay and then took it out and made herself a seahorse mold and made metal clay seahorses for her jewelry. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. So you can do sand, anything that has a texture, you can relate that into your polymer clay or into your metal clays and make your own molds. And it's a lot of fun. For finished work, I'll use the needle files. I also got these sanding sticks in different grits because they're really good for getting inside the little tiny crevices or joins that you have, and you can get in there and really dig out some of the less refined sections of your clay when it's dry, before you fire it. You want to work in a method. You want to kind of have an idea of what you want to do with the clay before you actually pull it out of the package, because once you take it out of the package, it will start drying. And that's really good for working on it, to fire it. But while you're working on it, you want to keep it mildly hydrated. So I have spray bottles, and this is a commercial clay hydrator that I get, but it's a little spray bottle and you just mist it lightly. Don't overhydrate your clay to keep it nice and moist. And you'll want a plastic wrap. I use plastic sandwich bags because they're thicker. And what you want to do before you start actually working with your clay or designing your clay, you want to pull off what you think you're going to need in a little ball. And I just put that inside the plastic wrap. And from a distance, I'll lightly mist and wrap it in there. And then I get my roller and I'm going to want to knead that clay because I want to work the moisture back through all of the clay. So you don't have dry sections and you don't have air pockets. And it just helps to really get the clay in a much more usable texture. So I'll roll it, knead it, fold it up. And if you overhydrate, you'll find that it sticks to the bags more. And I gave it a little too much moisture because it was still pretty moist from the last time I worked with it. But you want to just fold it back on itself and then knead it until you see the moisture has been worked back through it pretty good. And then once you do, you can just fold it up into a little lump. The two forms of clay you can get are lump, or actually there's more than two, but you can get lump clay, which is pre-wet and comes in a little lump. You can get origami or paper clay, which comes in, is more flexible, so you can do sheets. And you can get powdered clay, which is just the binder and the metal clay without the hydration. Since I'm new at it and still learning, I tend to go with the lump clay because I don't really have the whole moisturizing, rehydrating time and patience. I'm a very impatient person. I want to open the package and go. So once you have your clay and you've worked it, I smush it on my fingers a little bit. You want to put your work surface, make sure that you have a little bit of a lubricant on your surface. I'm working directly on my clay workspace. A lot of people will work on parchment or they'll work on sheet protectors, plastic sheet protectors, and that allows you to lift the clay up and move it without having to lift the edges. So if you're doing a lot of flat work, like if you're doing very thin flat pieces and you have to peel it, you're going to dent your clay when you're having to lift it if you don't have a plastic surface. Whereas if you have the plastic surface, you can lift that up and then peel it away so you're not putting the pressure on the clay and you're not messing up your design. But the surface lubricant that I use is it's a witch hazel, but you can use cooking spray, olive oil, any kind of lubricant that's a oil base so that you don't have the clay stick to your work surface. And I rub it in with my hands, so I have it on my hands. And then I'll also rub it onto my tools so it doesn't stick to my tools. And if I don't have enough on my hands after I finished, I'll squirt a little in my hand and then I'll rub it onto the tools so that everything is nice and lubricated and you're not going to have clay stick to it. Because there's nothing more sad than having your design all done and you go to add a final detail and you go to lift it up and it just tears or falls apart. So it's kind of an important step. So to shape it, after you've kneaded it, you're going to want to shape it and start adding your textural details. So I just kind of flatten it out with my fingers and then I'll roll it. And I have 5 cards thickness on my roller right here. These bands, they're 5 card thick. So it gives me a nice consistent thickness to the clay, and I'll roll it that way and then I'll roll it this way. So I get it all nice and consistently thick. And then I'm going to decide what I want to do. In this case, I'm going to cut a circle and I'm going to peel up the edges. Got too much lubricant. And take the edge away. And as soon as I pull away the extra, I usually will put it back into the package where the moisture is, so it doesn't dry out, because this stuff does start to dry out relatively quickly once you've cut it. So at this point, I get to decide what I want to do for a design. I think I'm going to go with, make sure you have a little bit of lubricant on your stamps because you don't want it to stick to your clay. And then I'm just going to push the design in. And see if I can get a little bit closer shot on that. You can see that the design picks up really well. It gets all the little details and everything in there. So you get quite a bit of detail from the clay, and it will keep that detail all the way through the firing. If you wanted to add a little bit, like say I want to do leaves or something around the edges, what I would do is I'd take a little bit of clay, I would roll it, and then you can make a paste or slurry out of essential oils. Generally, they say lavender, pure lavender essential oil is one of the better ones to use as a mix. You don't want it to be liquefied, you just want it to be thinner to allow for it to stick. And this is clay stay from Aussie Metal Clays. Since I use their base metals a lot, I use this on my clays. I know that it works real good with their clay. And I just will take my clay after I've put down the paste, and I'll stick it on there where I want it. And then if I want to do any detailing, I will take a tool and I will push down and shape how I want it. Push it down and just come back with a little bit of detail, and it's done. So the leaf is on there. So the first thing, after I get all the details on there that I want on there, which I'm not going to do a whole big design because class, but once you get all the details on there that you want, I put my clay away, the extra clay, and I will take this and I will dry it. And the drying stage for metal clay is very important, because if you don't dry it thoroughly, you'll have moisture in there. And when you go to sinter it, or even when you go to burn off the binder, you can blow pieces off. It just, the water expands and it doesn't have anywhere to go, so it'll blow your clay open. So what I have here is a cup warmer, and I have a stainless steel mesh that I put over the top, and I will just take my piece and put it on here to dry. So I'll just leave that on there to dry until, I usually leave it on there at least 2 hours, 1 hour, and then I'll flip it over, and then I'll let the other side dry nice and dry. And once it's all dry, then you get to the stage where you're going to fire it. And to test to make sure it's dry enough, which I didn't bring my mirror out here, so I'm going to use my phone. So turn off. You'll heat it up and on your dryer, and it should be at temperature, and you'll take it and you'll lay it on top of your mirror surface. And if you see condensation around or underneath your piece, then it's not dry enough and you want to return it back to the drying and let it dry some more. So you'll put that aside and you'll let it dry for a while. And just a quick note, if you're working in sterling or fine silver, you want to make sure that all of your tools are either plastic or stainless steel, because sterling silver and fine silver clay will react to the copper in the tools or anything else it touches. So that's why I stress stainless steel mesh, stainless steel tools, because if you're using your fine silver or your sterling silver and it discolors, it's going to make you sad, because it will also it'll also stain the rest of your piece even after it's fired. So we're going to pretend that this is all nice and dry. This is actually one I've already fired. but it's your dry piece. It's all, you know, nice and dry. You're want to take your sanding sticks or your needle files, and you're going to want to clean up your design. If there's fingerprints, you're going to want to sand out any imperfections. You want to shape up, finish any shaping. You want to soften your rough edges. You want to do all of this at this stage when it's dry, because it's like working with a sandstone, and it cleans up really, really well. So if you do it at this stage, it's a lot easier than when it's final metal and you have to sand and polish and sand. And I will tell you that fingerprints will stay on your metal piece unless you brush them out. After you've gotten all your detail work done and you're happy with it and it looks nice and finished, what you want to do is take a damp brush, and you're going to want to brush the surface. This is something that somebody told me. It was a really brilliant idea. Brush over the surface to polish it. And you're going to want to take out any like crumbs and any little sand that's loose on the surface, because it will sinter back into itself. So if you have like a little grain of metal clay on the surface, it's going to sinter itself to that piece. So this is just a really nice finished piece. You just take it, you finish brushing it, make sure you get your back nice and even, and then dry it again for about 5 minutes to make sure you get all that moisture nice and out, because you don't want to put it in there even a little bit moist. Do your mirror test to make sure it's fully dry, and then you're going to go to the firing stage. And I know I'm running through this kind of fast because I don't want to run out of time. Feel free to contact me anytime you want to ask questions. So once you get to the firing stage, there are 3 or 4 different ways to fire your clay. You can use a torch. You can use a beehive kiln, which is the little electric kiln they use for enameling. You can use the microwave kiln, which I've heard terrible things about. So if you're going to use that, make sure you do a lot of research. There are groups out there that use those, and they have a Facebook page just for that, but be very, very careful. The next thing you want to do is, oh, no, I'm off. So what I use is a kiln, because I've never tried to torch fire. It seems a little bit more complicated to me. If you use a torch, you're going to have a tripod setup where you have your stainless steel, and you're going to have a fireproof surface, which I would recommend fire brick or the solder blocks. And you're going to take a torch and you're going to evenly heat your piece and maintain a specific color to that metal for the subscribed amount of time for it to fully sinter. And I don't trust myself to have that kind of control. And I have kilns because I also do glass work, so that's what I use. So when you get ready to put it in there, I'm going to give you instructions for firing in a kiln. There's lots and lots of information out there for torch firing if that's something that you're interested in doing. When I put my stainless steel, I'll take it directly from the warmer and put this in my kiln. These are called kiln stilts. And I put the mesh on it so that the air can flow underneath and from the top to thoroughly burn off that binder. So the first stage of firing in most clays, almost all clays have a 2-stage firing. You fire off your binder and then you put it back in and you sinter it at a higher temperature. So for the burn off stage, you'll put it in a kiln like this, and you'll heat it up to the specific instructions that are in the package, which almost every single clay package you'll get will have the directions for burnout and for sintering. If you can't find it, look up that brand of clay on internet, and those instructions are generally on their websites. But for this particular piece, it would go in to the kiln at 750 degrees. You ramp full up to 750. You hold it for 30 minutes, and then as soon as you can safely handle it, you can take it out of the kiln. If it were fine silver, you would not even have to take it out of the kiln. You could just reset your kiln to sinter. because it doesn't oxidize. But for base metals and sterling silver, if you're going to fire it in the kiln, you want to create a reduced oxygen atmosphere by using activated carbon or activated charcoal. What I use is coconut carbon that I got off Amazon. So, and you can reuse this over and over again. It's not terribly expensive, but you want to make sure that when you put it in there, you use a stainless steel container, and it should have a lid. Some people don't use lids. I usually use a lid. The more reductive the atmosphere, the less oxidation you get in your metal. If you don't use a lid, you might come out, it might be black. And that just means a little extra elbow grease to get that oxidation off. So what you'll do is, once you can safely handle this after getting it out of the kiln, make sure you have a fireproof and area to put your work when you take it out of the kiln. Don't just set it on a table, because it's coming out of the kiln hot and it will still burn your tables or your workstations. So what you'll do is you'll put your piece, you'll put about a 1/4 inch to an 1/8 inch of carbon activated charcoal in the bottom, put your piece on top, then you'll take more and you'll cover it with about an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch of activated charcoal over the top. Then you're going to put a lid on it. And I usually just use the next size container as a lid, because that still allows a little bit of airflow, but it's not going to allow a lot of airflow. Again, with the kiln stilts, you want to put your piece in the kiln this way on the kiln stilts with the top on, so it's getting airflow underneath and over the top, so it heats evenly. If you're using the Aussie brass, or depending on how long it says to sinter, you're going to put it in your kiln. You're going to run the schedule according to the instructions, and then allow it to cool enough that you can handle it. You can flash cool your kiln by opening the door. You don't have to let it cool down slowly unless you have stones set in it. Your metal clay, you can fire stones in the clay. Certain stones, you have to make sure that they are compatible with being at high temperatures. If you have stones or delicate joins, you want to go ahead and let that cool down as slowly as possible to reduce the stress on those pieces. So once it's cooled down enough, you'll take it out of the kiln. If you do multiple pieces, make sure you leave at least a 1/4 inch of space between the pieces and that they're not touching. So once you take it out of the kiln, it's going to have this kind of chalky, sandy feel. It doesn't look like metal. It'll sound like metal if you drop it, but it doesn't really look like metal. And at this point, I throw it in the tumbler for a few minutes. I'll usually throw it in the tumbler for 30 minutes. I'm going to toss it in there right now for about 5 minutes. You're going to hear this wonderful whiny noise, but I almost forgot to put the top on. That would have been bad. But I put it in a magnetic tumbler for about 30 minutes, and it polishes it up really nice for me. Again, not a very patient person. You can take a wire brush and soap and water and just brush it really good, and that surface powder comes off. And that's just a little bit of time, but it should get some of this powder off. You can use a steel brush and soap and water, and it comes clean too. I use stainless steel pins and a burnishing, Shine Bright burnishing compound. And ouch, I have a little bit of a stainless steel shot that just went through my dress. But you can see, even after just that little bit of time, it's starting to burnish up. You can see the brass in it much better. And the longer you put it in there, the more it polishes and shines. If you have a lot of fine details, though, you want to try to mitigate damage to the surface. So I'll finish doing that later, but this is one that I've totally finished. And it's hard to see the sheen on it, but it's got a good metallic sheen. I filled the creases with resin, a colored resin, and it gives it a little more detail. So finishing up, once you've fired it and it's centered, it should, oh, I missed a whole section. So the first thing you should make in your metal clay is a test strip. And the test strip, when you roll it out and you make it, you should measure it for width, thickness, and width, because that's going to give you an idea how much it's going to shrink. And there is a between 8 and 30% shrinkage rate depending on the clay, which is important to know if you make rings. So when you fire it, it comes out. This is before I sintered it and after the binder's been burned off. And you can see at this stage, it is super brittle because you've burned off all your binder, the metal will just break. So you want to handle that piece of greenware very, very delicately at this stage, because it's basically just powdered that you can crumble with your fingers. So if you drop it, or if it's super delicate and you pick it up, you're going to end up breaking the piece off before you center it. So once you fire your test strip, this is what it looked like coming out of the kiln unpolished. It has a little bit of kiln patina on it. That's what those colors are. That goes away when you clean it up. You should be able to take your test strip and bend it all the way around. And I bend it forward and I bend it back all the way around without it cracking or breaking or coming apart. And that's how you know it's got a good center. And I recommend always, always, always do a test strip. And I will bend it all the way to see how far it bends before or if it ever cracks. So that's what you want to do for your test strips. You want to make sure that you do your test strip, measure it when it's wet, measure it again when it dries, and then measure it again when it comes out of the center. So you know all the different stages of shrinking, and you get an accurate size idea of how much your clay is going to shrink on your finished piece. So I almost forgot that important step. So once you finish it, finishing your clay is what makes it look better. You know, this one I didn't finish it all the way. It's still kind of got the powder on it. This stone was fired in place, and it's a sterling silver. And when I was polishing it, I cracked it. If I wanted to, I could add a little more clay, put it back in the kiln, refire it, and file that down, and it would be back to normal. It wasn't a center issue, it was a join issue. All of these leaves were added after the fact. This was just a plain band that I used the clay paste and pasted those leaves on and then detailed them. And this gives you an idea how fine of detail you can get. This was just done with the point of an X-Acto knife, and it's super tiny, but it kept every bit of the detail I put into it. So you can use patina, you can use brass black, you can use resin, you can enamel, you can do actual enameling on your silver pieces, because it is real metal after you've sintered the powders together. So that's basically the overview. And I hope I haven't forgotten anything. If I did, it's probably in the handout. And I'm going to switch over to the chat to see the questions, and I hope I can figure that out. Y'all forgive me if it takes me a minute. Okay. Magnetic tumblers have magnets in the bottom that cause it to vibrate. They're also called vibratory. It's just a different form of tumbling. It goes a lot faster than a rotary tumbler, which is the ones that just roll it around like rock polishers. Different metals shrink at different rates. You get between 8 to 30% depending on the clay. It is the different brands of clay, but it is also specific metals do shrink a little bit more than others. And I don't see any other questions. Did I miss? Oh yeah, there they are. I'm using a fooderonic tumbler. Hold on a second, I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a picture in just a second. And I use the stainless steel pins and Shine Bright burnishing concentrate. Well, and sintering is when you fire the clay. It's actually the powder in the clay melting together to bond. And you get shrinkage just in the drying as well, just like any other clay. It's a lot of shrinkage throughout. To Diana, if the clay is moist enough, you don't have to have a slurry to attach the pieces, but a lot of times you can lose those pieces when you fire it. A little bit of slurry helps to make sure that that's going to stay attached once you fire it. And for cleanup, I use sanding materials, polisher. I'm sorry? You can wash your hands to remove bits of clay, but you really want to save those bits of clay, Hillary. You can scrape them off your hands and put them in a little pile and then put them aside for later, because you can rehydrate any little pieces of dry clay and use it again. The parchment I'm talking about is like the baking paper, just a non-stick. I actually find better results with the plastic page protectors. Again, yeah, I use a little slurry to attach the pieces because it helps them stay in place better while it's sintering. Yes, definitely. A lot of the places that sell the clay sell the tools. The band system on the rollers. Let me see if I can find my other roller pieces in here. I'll show you a picture. I got them from Rio Grande. That's where I got most of the clay tools I use. And I think that's it on the chat questions. And I'll come back over here and see if I can find myself and get pictures of the stuff. Oh Lord, me and my non-techie self. Where am I? Okay, here I am. Hi, I'm Dee. I'm going to turn the camera around so I can start showing you guys some of the stuff. This is the the bands that I've told you about that I got from Rio Grande. And they come in sets of 4. And they are the different sizes, and they're basically the same unit of measurement. They're cards. So it'll say 3 card, 4 card, 5 card to give you an idea on the cards. And most of the instructions on firing also include the designation of cards. For people that came in late, they're referring to actual playing cards. So if you stack 3 cards up, that's a 3 card measurement. This is my magnetic tumbler. It is, I got it on Amazon. It was probably the most expensive piece of equipment that I've paid for. but I mostly got it because I do other metal work and I like having it around to be able to polish things up real quick.
Can you go back over there again
To the
to look at the tumbler?
Yeah. Is it focused in?
Yeah. Okay, got it. Taking a
And
picture.
It's got multi-speeds. And so far it's held up really well. It comes with a couple extra fuses, and sometimes you have to jiggle the thing on the top. That magnet is pretty strong that holds your container on top. It's pretty strong, and sometimes you have to kind of jiggle it on there to get it to start activating, but it works. I was dubious because it was not as expensive as the other ones.
So you're saying you could use it to polish cut work as well, rather than using like a bench grinder or something?
Yes, anything anything that you would polish. I also use it to polish, put a matte finish on glass beads, but I use a different shot in it when I do that.
Can you tell us
so what kind of shot do you use for glass?
I'm sorry?
What kind of shot do you use for glass?
That's for your glass class.
I use a stainless steel pin and balls, and it's the finest mix that you can get on Rio Grande.
Okay.
And that takes a significantly longer time than just to do the polish on your metalwork. Metalwork polishes up super fast compared to glass. Glass is kind of stubborn like that.
Do you need to have separate shot for the glass and for the metal pieces? Or is there some contamination?
It's all nice and foamy. Let me see if I can get the foam off. These are the stainless steel pins that I use for the metal work. And the stainless steel balls and pins that I use for glass are a bit heftier and includes like little stainless steel ball bearings.
Yeah, the mixture I've got is considerably heavier than that.
Yeah, and you can get the stainless steel pins, the fine pins on Amazon as well for like $6. Yeah, and you need to wash them very, very thoroughly. The first time I used it, it had bug pieces and some other things in it.
Lovely.
I was kind of like, I didn't realize it.
Makes you wonder where it came from.
No,
originally.
I don't want to know. I'm happier in my ignorance. But like I said, I'll have the handout put out. It's a little more organized and follows a little bit more of a tempo than I did in the class. This is only my second time trying to discuss this with people. It's been me trying to figure it out on my own, and I got a lot of help from a lady who teaches one-on-one classes for a pretty reasonable price. And because I wanted to make rings. That's my thing. I love making rings. And so she really walked me through it. And so like, this is the first style of ring I made. Where's my camera? But it's a little snake eating its tail. And then this is my favorite ring, even though it's super simple. It's in sterling, and it came out really nice. It's just a simple little ring.
Do you use those inserts to keep the rings from shrinking too much?
I do not. I try to plan for the shrinkage before I make them, and I make them on this really cool mandrel set.
Okay.
So it has mandrels for full size and half size, and I just make the rings directly on it because it gives me a base to, sorry about that. It gives me a really neat little base to put it on so I can make the ring and just rotate it and work on it. It gives me a supportive surface to work on. And I highly recommend, if you use that, a mandrel to make the rings on, give yourself at least 2 to 3 sizes. There's actually charts out there that'll tell you how much shrinkage to account for, because it also depends on thickness and and a lot of other things. But if you use a mandrel to make the ring on, take a piece of paper, a strip of paper, and wrap it around the mandrel and make it on the paper so you can slide it off. Because when the ring clay shrinks, if it's not on the paper, it won't come off very easily or in one piece.
Real quick, guys, 5-minute warning, but since lunch is next, I won't worry about putting you into breakout rooms. If you guys want to keep talking, you can just talk through lunch.
If there's any other questions, did I miss a chat question or anything?
I do
Can
have
you
one
show-
question real quick.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Would you mind going over the brands real quick one more time, please?
Sure. I actually have a couple envelopes of it. I think I took it in the house though. I store it at room temperature. I don't leave it out here in my studio because I don't want it to get ruined by getting too cold or too hot. It's Oklahoma. It could happen in a week.
I live in Mississippi. I understand.
So there's Prometheus clay, which is very torch friendly. So if you're going to work on clay on torches, that's the one you want to try with first. I use Aussie metal clay. They
Would you
have
mind
all
spelling that?
It's AUSSIE metal.
Okay.
And they have their own website. It's kind of hard to find it on the other websites, but if you go to their website, they have an American site and an Australian site. And yeah, the American site is really responsive. So I
Okay,
get my
thank
clay
you.
from them.
So are some of these products going to be on the handout?
Yes, I will have different
Oh, awesome.
makers or different brands, and I'll even have a couple books that I've gotten that have been really helpful.
Oh, excellent.
This book is my favorite book so far. It was given to me by Diane Dulac, and it is really well written as far as giving you just everyday language on how to do things. This book is full of really cool ideas, and these will be in my handout. This book is full of really good ideas and different techniques and a lot of the more advanced type things you can do with clay. And then I got this one. I haven't really had a chance to dig into it yet, but it's got a couple of good projects, and they all have stone setting and information on the more advanced techniques. I had something I wanted to say, you know what, out my head.
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
I'd like to see your kiln.
You want to see my kiln?
Yeah, I want to see it.
Okay, and this is my glass kiln that I also use for metal clay because my other kiln is still at my other house, my ex-husband's house. And it's really nice because it has a door you can open to get things in and out. If you have a top loading kiln, those are really nice for metal clay as well because they cool really quick. You just take the top off and then let it come down in temperature. You don't have to have a digital timer, but you do need to have a really good pyrometer to know the temperatures because a variation of 3 to 4 degrees can ruin your project. So you want to make sure you have a pretty good pyrometer on it. And but you can use any kiln that will go up to 1500 degrees.
Have you tried the beehive kilns? I've been wanting to get one of those.
I have not because I'm kind of afraid of them.
I can vote for the beehive. Are you talking about? You're talking about glass hive kiln or a beehive?
It was designed. The guy who designed it called it a beehive. I think Rio Grande is selling it now.
Okay. No.
Yeah, it's a little electric. It looks like a fondue pot almost.
Exactly, and it's like ceramic with a hot plate in the middle of it, and then some of them have what looks almost like an aluminum lid. But it's my understanding they were designed specifically for metal clay sintering.
They were designed for enameling, but they've also been developed they've been developed to use with metal clay, but I find that they're kind of restricted in size, and it's hard to get enough medium, the coconut, the activated charcoal, to keep it from oxidizing.
Oh, yeah. If you're going to be using the bronze or the,
Yeah.
where you need if you're just using the one that you don't need the charcoal.
Fine silver
Yeah.
does not need charcoal, because anything with a base metal is going to oxidize. And sterling silver, the more flexible silver, is higher in copper content, so it will reduce on you. You can get the oxidation off the surface of your bronzes. It just takes a little more elbow grease, let me tell you. I accidentally got impatient one time, and even though I fired it in a reduction atmosphere, I took it out of the kiln right away and took it out of the charcoal real fast, and it turned black instantly. It was bronze when I took it out, and then it went black, and it took me an extra 30 minutes just to get that oxidation off the surface. So I learned my lesson. I'm a much more patient person now. Not really.
I have a question about, again, another question about the kiln. Do you go back and forth glass and metal clay in the same kiln? Because I have a glass kiln, or a kiln that I have for glass that I use for my beads. Do you and I've heard that sometimes you can, I can't remember, it's been so long since I've talked about this, I can't remember the word, that you can, mess up the chemistry of the inside of the kiln if you do things in the kiln that aren't glass, and then you'll affect your glass later.
Yes, if you do a lot of fine silver, you will fume your glass when you put it in there. The silver will be in that kiln block, and it will potentially come back and fume the surface of your glass, and glasses that are reactive to silvers will turn colors. But if you vacuum your kiln and you clean your kiln out religiously between uses, like I do, like I've had that kiln for almost 5 years, and it does not have any discoloration to the actual kiln block because I go in and clean it. I clean it a lot to make sure that there's no charcoal, there's no metal, there's nothing in there. But I also do everything in a reduction atmosphere, so it's not as much, there's not as much metallic pollution.
Now I feel bad for not being a good kiln owner.
So do you do a kiln wash?
Yes, I use a kiln wash, but I also use a kiln shelf on the bottom of my kiln because I am terrified of the metal. I have seen the stainless steel containers melt, and I don't want anything to stick to my fiber blanket or to my fire kiln walls, because it's a real pain to get it off of there. You have to actually dig it out of the kiln brick. And so use a kiln shelf, makes your life easier. Just leave it in there. Take it out and clean between uses. But I just have it on the floor of my kiln, and I've got kiln wash on the walls of my kiln. Be careful of your pyrometer though. And don't feel like a bad kiln owner. My other kiln that I use only for glass, it has never been cleaned, except I sweep out the pieces of thermal shock that fall in there. But since I'm using this for both, I clean it out. Anybody else? Shoot me an email and I'll send you the handout. And I will let you guys go so our host can have lunch.
Thank you, Mistress Beatrix.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.